mums and dads. I'm really excited to get going in the book of Joshua, so we're going to jump back into the Old Testament for a few weeks, and I hope you guys will have a wonderful time studying the book of Joshua and seeing the character of God throughout this book. So just some background knowledge is that the book of Joshua brings Israel's 40 years in the wilderness to a close. Moses is the last of the disobedient generation to die. The people were excluded from the promised land because of their lack of faith. You can read that in Numbers 14 verse 13. Moses for failing to honor the Lord in a moment of anger, that's in Numbers 20 verse 12. And Israel are now finally ready to enter the promised land and to receive the fulfillment of the promise that God has made to Abraham many, many years before. You can have a look at that in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 to 3. So let's have a look at a few verses. Chapter 1, verse 1 to 5. After Moses' death, the responsibility for leading Israel into the promised land was given to Joshua. He and Caleb were the only two of the 12 spies to show faith in the promises of God and his power to conquer the inhabitants of Canaan. That's in Numbers 13, verse 30. God assured Joshua that he would be with them to give them the victory by defining the extent of the land that they would possess. Then verse 6 to 9, the appropriate response to God's promise is to trust that he will keep his word. God commands them to be strong, courageous, and obedient, as this is the natural outworking of faith. Then in verse 16 to 18, Joshua passed God's instructions onto the officers and the people. And their confidence in Joshua as a leader was based on their understanding that God was with him, just as he had been with Moses. Chapter 2, verse 1, Jericho stood at the entrance of the mountain pass that led to the interior of the land. So it was strategically very important. Although God had not directly commanded the Israelites to spy out the land, they acted both wisely and in faith by preparing the conquest. And then in verse 2 to 7, what happens is when the king of Jericho heard about the Israelites' mission, he sent men to go and find them. Rahab, however, hid the spies and diverted their purposes. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31, and James chapter 2, verse 25, they praise Rahab for her faith in protecting the men. Verse 8 to 14, news of God's miracles and victories in Egypt and throughout the Israelites' journey in the wilderness had reached Canaan. So there were two very different reactions among the people in the land. You can see the one in verse 11, which was fear, and then you can see the other one in verse 12 to 13, which was faith. From chapter 6, verse 17, we know that in Jericho, only Rahab responded in faith. Her request reveals inward change. She believed that God had given them the land, turned to them, seeking rescue, and in doing so, she cut herself off from her own people. The spies' oath that they would act faithfully was the sign that Rahab sought. Then in verse 15 to 21, Rahab, we see, helps the spies to escape, and she told them how to evade their pursuers. The spies then set out the terms of their covenant with Rahab. Her rescue depended on her faith alone, which was going to be expressed in her obedience to the spies' instructions. So there was nothing special about the scarlet cord. It simply distinguished Rahab from the faithless Canaanites and acted as a sign of saving faith. This is similar to the sign given to the Israelites to distinguish them during the Passover, when they had to paint the lamb's blood on their door frames. Then in verse 22 to 24, the spies reported exactly what Rahab had said to them. The assessment of the land contrasts strikingly with the original report of the spies. Go read Numbers 13, verse 31 to 33, because remember, this is the second time they are going to go and spy out the land. The Israelites' time in the wilderness appears to have strengthened their faith in God's promises, just as he had commanded in chapter 1, verse 6 to 11. Just a few things for you to ponder as you think about teaching your children on Sunday is to just think about Rahab and to look at how did she respond to what she knew about God. And what did Rahab do to show that she trusted God to save her? And then secondly, how did the other Canaanites respond to the same truth about God? How is this different to people today? And why is this the case? And then thirdly, won't you pray that people will truly know who God is and respond in faith? I hope you have a wonderful time teaching your children on Sunday. I'm going to do a little introduction on Sunday for the kids into the book of Joshua, so don't worry about that. I'll bring them up to speed, and I really hope the kids will have lots of fun. Joshua is a great book because it's a story that is narrated for us, and so I hope that as families we will gather together each week for the next few weeks and learn more about who God is, and that our faith and trust in him will grow and will be evident in our lives.